From the pre-birth planning perspective, you viewed your most difficult experiences as providing both the opportunity and the motivation to cultivate and express the virtues. So let's take a common example. Let's say that somebody wants to cultivate compassion in the upcoming lifetime. Many life plans are what I call learning through opposite life plans. You plan to experience the exact opposite of what you want to eventually learn so that it will drive you within. You'll cultivate compassion, or in this case, self-compassion, by incarnating most likely in a family that lacks compassion. And then after you've cultivated self-compassion, the soul's hope is that you will take that and turn it outward in service to others, offer the compassion to everybody else. So this kind of learning through opposites plan is extremely common. It's the most common type of pre-birth plan I see.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ask Julie Ryan Show. It's where we blend spirituality and practicality to help you live a life of purpose and joy. We have Rob Schwartz with us on the show today. Rob's a hypnotist who offers between lives soul regressions to help people explore their life plans. Now, I have lots of questions for him, like, why would somebody choose to experience a physical illness or disability or anything else we'd see as a challenge or even horrific? Please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with your family and friends. Now let's go talk with Rob. Hi, Rob. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Julie. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, fellow Buckeye. We were talking before we started recording that you live in Ohio, and that's where I grew up and was born and graduated and all of that jazz. So it's nice to be able to talk to a fellow Buckeye. What's pre-birth planning? Do we all do it?
Pre-birth planning is just what it sounds like. It's the planning of the upcoming incarnation before we come to body. As far as I know, we all do it. And this is the subject of my 3 books. I go into people's pre-birth planning sessions, hear the conversations they had with family members, friends, adversaries, quote unquote, when they're planning their lives, and in particular when they're planning their biggest challenges. The focus of the books is on challenges in an attempt to give meaning to experiences that to most people seem not to have any deeper meaning. And then when you know what the underlying spiritual lessons are, you can focus on learning them in a much more conscious and much less arduous manner.
In that pre-birth planning experience, let's say, are there others involved? For example, would it be a parent, perhaps, of a sick child that was all being planned, and so the parent spirit's corroborating and collaborating with collaborating is the word, with the person who's doing the pre-birth planning? In other words, are our loved ones and friends and people who are close to us, are they involved in that plan as well? And are they actively involved?
They are involved, and they are actively involved. And that's what I see when I go into people's pre-birth planning sessions. The other souls who are going to play significant roles in the upcoming incarnation are there, not necessarily all at the same instant, but they come in sequentially as different things are being planned. So in your example of a child and a parent, if the child is planning for reasons of his or her own to have some kind of disability or some illness, or vice versa, if the parent is planning that for their experience, they'll be together in the pre-birth planning talking about this, and one will tell the other, here's what I'm planning for my incarnation, and these are my reasons for wanting to have that very difficult experience. And then they'll ask the other to play a certain role. For example, the one who's going to be the child will say something like, would you agree to be the mother who shepherds me through this very difficult experience? So it's all by consent.
Is the mother spirit in that example, has that mother spirit already incarnated, or is that before any of them are conceived?
This is before any of them are conceived. Now, after they're in body, and this is, I understand it happens with all of us, when we sleep at night, we leave the physical body, we travel back to the non-physical realm in the astral or spirit body, And we get together with the other significant people in our life, and we ask basically one question, which is, are we learning what we came to learn? If the answer is yes, then carry on. But if the answer is no, then you have a discussion about what needs to change in the pre-birth plan so that everybody can learn what they came to learn.
Okay. I am going through this right now. My best friend died Tuesday morning.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Very suddenly. Thank you. She was found in her bed, in her jammies, under the blankies. We've been friends since I was 10. And I was at her home this past weekend. My cooties are still on the guest room sheets because she said, don't change the bed. You're going to be the next one sleeping in the bed in 6 weeks, when I was going to be back there for a wedding. She was perfectly fine, Rob, when I left her on Sunday at noon, because I went to a bridal shower. She went to a different bridal shower. I get this call Tuesday morning that she's been found dead in her bed. And I'm like, what the heck is this? So, of course, I can talk to her spirit. Thank you, God. And this is why this is so valuable. I say to everybody, if you don't want to take my classes, take somebody else's class. Learn how to talk to spirit, because it's the most comforting thing we can do. So I get her on the line, her spirit. I'm like, what the heck? And she told me she threw a blood clot and had a massive heart attack at 3 a.m, which was corroborated by the people that came to get her, the police and all of that. Question to you on that is, something like that, that's so shocking. She was perfectly healthy on no medications, no sign of anything, that was out of order. And I had just been with her. What's that all about? How do we make sense of something like that?
My understanding is that before we incarnate, each of us plans multiple, what you would call exit points. And as a general rule, somebody will take an exit point under one of two sets of circumstances. One is the person has learned what they came to learn and done what they came to do, so it's just time to go home. Or the opposite of that, the soul has concluded for whatever reason that they will not be able to learn what they came to learn or do what they came to do. And in that case, the soul isn't interested in expending time and energy for no purpose. The soul's point of view is it's better to start over and finish what was left incomplete in the next incarnation.
Well, when I asked her, what was this all about? She said, everything's in perfect order. And she's told several of their mutual friends, everything's in perfect order. And her husband had passed, her name's Lisa, her husband had passed 6 years ago. She never really got over that. I mean, she put on a good front, but she was so missing him for all those years. And I just think she died of a broken heart. I think she, no coincidence that she died of a massive heart attack, completely healthy. I think she was ready to go. Everything was in line and, she decided to go. Is that where free will comes in, where it's a situation to those exit points where you're like, I don't want to take this one yet. I don't want to stay a little longer and explore some more stuff. Or is it, I'm going to stay a little longer and I want to give my kids the opportunity to explore more things, or give whomever that opportunity?
My understanding is that free will does play a big part in that decision, but that the bottom line decision is made by the soul, by the higher self. So if the incarnate personality has a strong preference to leave or a strong preference to stay, the higher self knows that and takes it into account. But the higher self, as you know, has a much broader viewpoint and knows what is for the highest good of all beings in a way that the incarnate personality just can't know. So it's basically the decision is made when it's for the highest good for all beings.
Yeah, well, that's what she keeps saying, everything's in perfect order. Now, we still suffer from a human perspective. On Tuesday, I think I cried for 9 hours straight. And the funeral's next week, so I'll be a mess with that too. And at the same time, I can see all the blessings that have come in. I've gotten to see her every other month or every 6 weeks for the past year. I was just with her less than 48 hours before she died. There's been several signs that have come into me from a variety of different ways. And one of them was a mutual friend of ours was talking to her spirit and said, my friend Mary said, well, what can I do to help comfort Julie? And Lisa said, send her some sunflowers. And so she did. The arrangement arrived yesterday. And so we looked up the spiritual meaning, and it was to keep optimistic and hope alive during difficult times. I'm going, okay. Many signs have come in already just in the couple of days since she's passed. And I think that is something that we can hang on to on our path of trying to make sense of this, because it'll never make sense to us from our human perspective. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that. And that's been a learning for me. When I set out approximately 20 years ago to write books about pre-birth planning, I thought I'll learn everything about this and help people to make complete sense out of the most difficult experiences we have. And I have concluded that that is not going to be possible, and that is just not going to happen. I think I've helped people to understand things as well as you can understand them from the incarnate perspective. But again, that's not the broader perspective. And, the human brain works in a very limited way, I think. It's essentially a biocomputer, and as with any computer, the outputs are wholly dependent upon the inputs. Well, the inputs to the brain come primarily through the five senses, which pick up just a very narrow sliver of what is actually out there. So that greatly limits the kind of understanding that the human brain can have. And I think there are just things that are going to be mysterious and beyond the understanding of the human brain, but we'll understand them when we get back to the other side.
And that's where I go with things that I don't understand. I just say, okay, is it feasible? Yeah. Do I understand it? No. Will I understand it when I get back to heaven? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I just go with that. It reminds me of being a little kid in Catholic school, and I'd ask the nuns a question and they couldn't answer it. And they'd say, well, it's a mystery. So, okay, that wasn't very satisfying as an answer. Nevertheless, I heard that more than once. So does pre-birth planning include things like this? I'm going to exit in a way where it's going to shock everybody. We talked about a child coming in with an illness or relationship problems. I know your books address that, but can you give us the cliff notes on what are some of the different lessons that we learn from those different kinds of experiences?
So there are a lot of reasons for planning difficult experiences during an incarnation. The bottom line reason, if you take all the others and distill them down, they have a common denominator, and that is that the soul wants to learn how to better give and receive love fully and freely. So very often something painful like an unexpected tragic death, that's done to break open people's hearts so that they can, in fact, give and receive love more fully and freely. That can sound cruel, depending upon how you look at it, but that is most surely not the soul's intention. The soul's intention is to learn how to give and receive love fully and freely. A lot of the planning of these kinds of experiences also revolves around something that I call divine virtues. These are qualities that are very important to the soul, and the soul would like the personality to cultivate and express, both cultivate and express certain virtues. In the work that I do over the years, I've put together a list of, I think it's 28 or 29 now, that I've seen come up the most often. It's things like unconditional love, empathy, patience, compassion, kindness, gentleness, and so on. What I found is that the average person is working on 2 or 3 in a lifetime. Occasionally, somebody's working on 4 or 5. As far as I know, nobody is working on more than 5. That would be too much for anyone to do. And the person who's working on 4 or 5 almost always has a life filled with trauma. If somebody doesn't immediately think they're working on 4 or 5, they probably aren't. They're probably working on 2 or 3. From the pre-birth planning perspective, you viewed your most difficult experiences as providing both the opportunity and the motivation to cultivate and express the virtues. So let's take a common example. Let's say that somebody wants to cultivate compassion in the upcoming lifetime. Many life plans are what I call learning through opposite life plans. You plan to experience the exact opposite of what you want to eventually learn so that it will drive you within. You'll cultivate compassion, or in this case, self-compassion, by incarnating most likely in a family that lacks compassion. And then after you've cultivated self-compassion, the soul's hope is that you will take that and turn it outward in service to others, offer the compassion to everybody else. So this kind of learning through opposites plan is extremely common. It's the most common type of pre-birth plan I see.
Well, and the thing that I experience with my clients, and I've experienced this thousands of times, so I'd love to hear your take on it, Rob, is I'll see a semblance of a script that will appear in multiple lifetimes. And it's like we're playing a different role in a movie. It's the same basic script, but let's say there's a child that's sick. Well, one incarnation may be the actual child who's sick. Another one may be the mother of, the father of, the doctor of, the sibling of, the grandparent of, the friend of, the whatever. And we're just exploring this from a bunch of different perspectives. I like to use the analogy of Hamlet. You think about how many times has Hamlet been performed since Shakespeare wrote it in 1602? Who knows? Same script, different perspective. What language, where, what was happening in the world, who were the actors, all those different variables will create a different perspective. Do you have a take on that one way or the other?
Yeah, I see exactly the same thing in my work. So, I'm a hypnotist. I do only one kind of hypnosis. It's called a between lives soul regression. And it's a long session, usually about 2 hours long. We do it sometimes in groups, also in private sessions. It starts out with some steps to help the person or the group relax, and then I guide them into a past life. And it's interesting, the instructions are to experience several different scenes in the same past life. But despite that, about 15% of people will be shown scenes from different lifetimes. And then we go from the past life to talking to what is called their council of elders, where they can ask questions about the current life. But when this process is over, if they've seen scenes from different lifetimes, a lot of times they'll say, well, what was that all about? Those different lifetimes don't have anything to do with each other. They don't on the surface because they look completely different. But if you probe a little deeper, you find out they were working on the same underlying lessons in each one of those lifetimes. So I call that an arc of lives. An arc is a series of incarnations in which you work on the same lesson. And then when you feel complete with that lesson, you go on to another arc of lifetimes.
And I've heard a bazillion times from spirit that time doesn't exist in the spirit world. Time's a human creation. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that.
Yeah. I want to get to the Council of Elders. I want to talk about that in a minute. But when you say you do regressions of lives in between lives, are you doing a regression of like the planning in heaven in between lifetimes? Or is it just some kind of a term to basically group all past lives together? That's question number one. And piggybacking off of that, do we live multiple lifetimes concurrently?
My understanding is we do live multiple lifetimes concurrently. And it's interesting, when I research people's pre-birth plans for my books, I rely on a number of different channel sources, one of whom is Jesus. I work with a channel who channels him. And I asked him in one of the channeling sessions about the multiple lifetimes. And he gave a very basic confirmation that we do have multiple incarnations going at the same time, but then essentially said, your task, your focus is the lifetime that you are in. You don't really need to know about your soul's other incarnations. And actually, it's not necessarily to your advantage to know about them because everybody's got enough going on in their own life to occupy their consciousness. This would just be a distraction and a diversion. So he didn't really encourage delving into that. Coming back to the between lives soul regressions, known as a BLSR for short, we don't actually regress people back to the pre-birth planning per se. What we do is take somebody to their council of elders. These are the wise, loving, highly evolved beings who oversee their personal evolution. Everybody has their own council of elders. There are different numbers on different councils, different beings. And when you get to your council, you can ask them literally any question you have about the current life. They know everything about your life plan. They know everything about every past incarnation you've had, every non-physical experience you've had, literally everything about you as a soul. Most commonly, people will ask, what did I plan? Why did I make those plans? How am I doing? And how can I do better? And then everything flows from that.
So, Council of Elders, let's talk more about that. Who are they? Were they all human incarnated at one point? Are they guardian angels or other angels that are involved? Are they spirits that have not lived a human life, but maybe come from other galaxies or other realities of which we're unaware? Who comprises the Council of Elders?
I have a friend who channels God or Source. I asked that very question of God through this friend. And the response I got was that the beings who are on the various councils of elders are so highly evolved that it is literally beyond human comprehension. Now, having said that, there are identifiable, recognizable beings on some people's councils. Sometimes there are angels. Sometimes there are what we call ascended masters. I've seen Jesus appear on a number of people's councils. Sometimes Saint Germain is there or another ascended master. But mostly people will see them as either just light, or they'll present as very powerful but gentle and strong, wise elderly figures, usually in white robes. It's interesting, they have the same comments about their councils. They always talk about how unconditionally loving the council is. And they'll say things like, I could tell that my council knew literally everything about me, including all the bad things I've done, but they loved me unconditionally anyway. So they talk about this total non-judgment and the feeling of safety and comfort that brings. And for many people, that's the first time they felt that since they came into body. So it's really a homecoming of sorts.
Yeah. Well, I got a big smile on my face because Council of Elders I call spirit guides. And they appear to me, like what you just said, they appear like a version of Father Time. And I always say, think of Dumbledore in the Harry Potter movies or Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings movies, old man, white beard, long white hair, in a white gown. And then when we talk to them, and there's always, when I scan somebody, there's always 7 of them around them, and they're kind of in a horseshoe pattern behind them. And then when we ask a question, the spirit guide that most applies to whatever that person's working on that has to do with the question will appear, and then they'll morph into what they look like in the lifetime that they lived. And they'll give us a lot of times their name and where they lived, and like they could show up like, the banker in Monopoly, or I've had Mary Kay Ash show up, the Mary Kay pink Cadillac lady, and she shows up, she's got the wig on, she's got the nails, she's got the whole 9 yards. And then we'll ask them, what are you advising so-and-so, my client, on? And they'll come back with very succinct things that are advising. It's been my experience too, and I'd love to hear your opinion of this, Rob. It's been my experience that we can have different spirit guides, Council of Elders, if you will, in different times in our lives. So sometimes we'll have some that stay with us for a long time. And then when we're exploring something new, sometimes we'll have a new spirit guide that will arrive and help the person in whatever it is they're wanting to explore with this topic that perhaps has resulted from a trajectory that they've been on all their lives, that's led them to this place. But I'll see new ones come in at times. Have you experienced that as well?
Yeah, and to me, there's a distinction between spirit guides and those who are on the Council of Elders. But I do agree with what you just said about guides coming and going, depending upon what the person chooses to do. So, for example, let's say somebody decides to go to medical school and become a doctor. well, then you might attract to yourself a guide who was a doctor in a past lifetime. Now he's there to guide you through medical school. So that kind of thing happens quite commonly.
So what's the difference between spirit guides and a council of elders?
Well, according to the answer I received from Source through my friend, the members of the council are actually much more highly evolved than the spirit guides. And the council is more of an oversight body. The guides are more into the nitty-gritty of day-to-day living.
Oh, interesting. I love that. So the council of elders would perhaps be the ones that are helping plan what the lifetime is going to be, kind of like the zoning board at the local community or something. And then you got the contractors that are involved when you're building who are helping guide you to build. Perhaps they would be more like the spirit guides.
No, I think that's a good analogy.
Yeah. I never thought about that way. Interesting. Okay. Terrific. Okay. How'd you get interested in this work? Do you come from a spiritual family? I mean, you just wake up one day and say, oh, I'm going to check out Council of Elders and spirit guides and stuff like that.
Now, this is through guidance. I mean, to me, it's just miraculous that from where I started and where I'm at now, it's just a miracle. But I grew up in a Reformed Jewish family. We were not spiritual. We were just mildly religious. And what happened for me back in 2003, I was in a corporate world, self-employed as a marketing and communication consultant, doing different kinds of corporate writing. I didn't like this work at all. And perhaps more to the point, I felt that I had come to Earth to do something quite specific that I wasn't doing, and that it was time to get going with whatever it was. And I knew I couldn't continue in the corporate world, but I didn't know what else to do. So almost out of desperation, I went for the first time ever, to a psychic medium. At that time in my life, I wasn't even sure if I believed in mediumship, but I just didn't know what else to do. So the first thing she says to me is, your spirit guides are here. And I said, what is a spirit guide? I'd never even heard the term before. So she explained that. And then she said, your guides want to talk directly with you. And she started to channel them. The first thing they said was, you planned your life, including your biggest challenges, before you were born. And I shook my head and I said, well, why in the world would I have done something like that? They said, you did this for purposes of spiritual growth. Then it got really interesting because they launched into this lengthy monologue in which they went through all of my challenges one by one and told me in detail why I had planned them. You have to understand, I didn't tell the medium anything about myself before the session. I didn't tell the guides anything about myself during the session. So they knew literally everything about me. That really got my attention. And then in the days and weeks after the session, thought about this pre-birth planning idea constantly. It created really quite a deep healing for me because it allowed me for the first time to see deeper meaning in the most difficult experiences. And then I thought, well, if it can create that kind of healing for me, surely it can do that for others. Then I started to think about writing a book about it. And then very shortly thereafter, I was introduced to a woman who can go into trance, channel her higher self. I had the extraordinary opportunity to talk with her higher self for about 15 hours about how pre-birth planning works. And then the most amazing experience of all, right at the same time, it was a weekday afternoon. I was taking a break from work and just walking down the street. And I had this experience in which every time I looked at another person, this feeling of pure, overwhelming, unconditional love for that person washed over me. This love was so strong, so pure, so intense. I could call it divine. I could call it transcendent. Those were the best words I can come up with, but nothing even begins to touch what this felt like. It was not a human kind of love. It changed everything. It changed my understanding of who and what I am, who and what everybody else is. And as this was happening, I was caused to know by a higher power that we as souls are made literally from the energy of unconditional love. I got that message loud and clear. What I didn't know was why this was happening. That actually became clear a couple of years later. By that time, I had looked at a lot of people's pre-birth plans for my first book, Your Soul's Plan. And what I found was that every plan, no exceptions, was based on total unconditional love for every person involved. And then I thought, aha, That experience 2 years ago was given to me so that when I found this result in my research, I would know for certain that it was true.
That sounds really esoteric. I mean, feels good, sounds good. Can you unpack that a little for us? If everybody's sole purpose is unconditional love, just bring it down to about a first grade level for us to explain it further, if you would, please.
Well, we spoke a little while ago about the divine virtues, things like compassion, patience, empathy, kindness, gentleness. All of the divine virtues, in the way I look at it, are just manifestations and permutations of unconditional love. That's really what they are. So the soul wants to experience all these different flavors, shades, colors of unconditional love. And, everybody has had the experience in life many, many times. You think something negative about another person and it doesn't feel good. Or you take what we would call a negative action and it just doesn't feel good. Or the opposite, you think a loving thought about somebody and it feels great. You take a loving action and it feels great. The reason the negative actions and thoughts feel bad and the positive ones feel good is that you, as a being created by source, created by love, in other words, you yourself are love. Love created you out of love, with love, for love, as love. So if you think or act in a way that is contrary to love, you're essentially going against your fundamental nature as a being. If you think and act in a way that is consistent with love, you're flowing in a way that is natural to you. But if you act or think in a way contrary to who and what you are, that just isn't going to feel good. We label that conscience, and from the human perspective, yes, it is conscience, but there's more to it than that. It's your fundamental nature to be love.
Well, and it's my perspective too, in my opinion, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, that in this human incarnation, when we know what we don't want, it helps us create what we do want. And we're always creating. We're here to create. Well, what do we create? Well, we create stuff every day. We create what you're going to wear, what you're going to have for breakfast, what are you going to do to exercise, whatever. And then when we die, what do? You've heard this bazillions of times. We go back to heaven and we create what our next incarnation is going to be. So I think as beings, our spirit's just always creating. I want to talk more about that exercise when we're in between lives and we're creating what the storyline is going to be for our next life with our Council of Elders. But before we get to that, Rob, tell us more about your opinion on people who are criminals, people who kill other people who are terrorists or whatever. That I have been told a bazillion times too, that all spirits are pure love and the personality stays with the body when somebody dies. And we go back, everybody goes to heaven, and we're all just a fractal of the divine and we're all pure love. So how do you explain somebody who's a murderer or a terrorist or somebody who's an abuser?
I completely agree with what you just said. And the explanation that I found in the research I've done for my books, well, let's take a particular example. So in the first book, Your Soul's Plan, there's an entire chapter about the pre-birth planning of accidents, which are not really accidents. And one of the stories in that chapter is about a woman who was blown up in a bomb explosion. So her pre-birth plan was that she wanted to become a very powerful healer. And she wanted to go through an extreme accident herself and learn how to heal herself first, and then take all of that wisdom and knowledge about healing and offer it in service to others. So that was her basic plan. So into her pre-birth planning session comes this other soul in her soul group who has had a number of past incarnations in which he couldn't control anger, and he expressed it in harmful ways. He wants to carry that energy of anger back into body, not for the purpose of expressing it again, but for the purpose of healing it. However, he's tried to do this a number of times before and was not successful, and it's understood he may not be successful once again. So this woman has a conversation with him, and they talk about the fact that he may fail in his attempts to heal his anger, and that if he does fail, what is foreseen is that he's going to plant a bomb, and this will be the trauma she goes through that propels her to become a great healer. Then there's some discussion of, well, what will happen if he does heal the anger and never plants the bomb? And her guides tell her, well, there will be some other cataclysmic event for you, car accident or whatever it might be, but there will be something that will propel you to become a great healer. So the other soul who's carrying the anger back in the body, it's not evil. As I understand it, nobody is actually evil, but there are beings who carry a lot of emotional pain and trauma with them. They bring it back into the body with the intention of healing it. And if they're not successful, they end up doing harm to other beings. His identity as the bomber in this lifetime, that's just a character. It's just the role that he's playing. We're all just playing a character in the particular lifetime. But as you say, when we're back on the other side, the character doesn't go with you. It's just your fundamental nature as love. That's who you are.
Yeah, that's how I explain it too, is it's like we're actors in a movie or in a play, and people say, well, my mom was just awful. She was abusive, or my dad was abusive, or whatever. And I say, well, when you see them in heaven, you can take them an Academy Award, an Oscar, and say, hey, you were the bitch from hell. Good job playing that role. And actors will always tell you that the most interesting roles are the ones that are of the bad guys. And they just have so much material to work with when that happens. The other couple of other things I've heard many, many times from spirit is that there's no right, there's no wrong in the spirit world. It's just an experience. And that when our guides and our deceased loved ones and others are watching what we're going through, even if it's a horrific situation, they're in heaven. I'm saying heaven as non-physical. Call it whatever you want. I call it heaven. And they're going, oh, cool. Look at what Rob's going through. How's he going to get through that? What's he going to create out of that? What's he going to learn? What's the soul lesson in this? And we look at that from a human perspective and think, that just makes no sense to us, in our human minds. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, that's exactly what my understanding is as well. It's like A Course in Miracles says, all events are neutral. We have trouble with that, I think, because we're conditioned from birth to judge. And, we think that judgment is normal, that it's natural, that things are actually good or bad. That's really just a lot of conditioning. All events are actually neutral.
Yeah. The other thing that I believe, just because I've heard it so many times from spirit, is we all decide when we're born, where we're born, to whom we're born, and the circumstances into which we're born. So it will set our lives on a trajectory that will allow us to explore and experience what it is we came in to explore. Furthermore, we all decide when we die, where we die, who's with us or not, what the circumstances are that surround that. And it's hard for the ones left behind to oftentimes get through the guilt of, gosh, what if I would have gotten Lisa to the emergency room? What if she had gone to see the doctor more recently? What could I have done to have prevented her? And I always tell them, there's nothing you could have done. First of all, you're not that powerful. Second, nobody is. And secondly, that it's a situation where that's that spirit's decision of what they want to explore and experience when they come in and when they exit. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I completely agree with everything you just said. And to take it a step further, in my second book, Your Soul's Gift, there's an entire chapter about the pre-birth planning of suicide. And what Spirit shared with me in the channeling sessions for that chapter is that if somebody completes a suicide, there was literally nothing any other person could have done to prevent it. And the reason for that is that if the suicidal person has even the slightest openness or willingness to change their mind, Spirit knows that, and Spirit stages an intervention. So I have a conversation with Jesus about this, and he says, quote, all suicides preventable by outside forces were indeed prevented. That's a reference to the intervention spirit stages if the suicidal person has any openness to change their mind. But if they don't, there's literally nothing spirit can do, and there's literally nothing any other person in body can do. So when I talk to audiences that have many people in them who have lost a loved one to suicide, I always say, take any guilt or self-blame you may feel, set it down, and step away from it. That's what your loved one wants for you, and there was literally nothing you could have done.
Yeah. And then I'll take it a step further and say, well, from a conceptual standpoint, if we all decide when we go, where we go, how we go, who's with us or not, and what the circumstances are surrounding our transition back into non-physical, is it perhaps that all death is a form of suicide? Doesn't matter how it happens. If we're deciding to leave, are all deaths a form of suicide? I tend to believe, yes, they are.
I would completely agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, great. You say that the earth and everybody on it is going through an ascension process. What do you mean by that?
So to understand ascension, we have to go way back eons in linear time to the initial separation. And what I'm talking about is, as I understand it, eons ago, the billions of us who are now in a body on Earth got together and we said essentially, we would like to make a unique contribution to the Godhead. We would like to experience something that has never been done or experienced before. What could that be? And the idea we came up with was separation. In other words, rather than remain in a state of oneness or unity consciousness, which is our natural state, let's create an experience in which we appear to be and believe ourselves to be separate individuals, separate from source, separate from each other. Now that you can't actually do that. You can't separate from the one, but what you can do, and what we did, is create an illusion in which we appear to be separate from the one. So we undertook this experiment in the experience of separation. And when we did that, the ego came into being. The ego, as I understand it, was initially this very primitive consciousness that served primarily to scan the physical environment for danger, alert the personality, and keep the physical body alive. But unfortunately, over millennia of time, people came to rely on the ego to make all kinds of decisions. And since the ego is fear-based, these were very low vibrational decisions. And so the vibration of humanity went down and down and down. And the more it went down, the more we felt cut off from spirit, the more individuals were just looking out for themselves. And then collectively at the soul level, this became so extreme that we said, enough. We are complete with the experience of separation. We know what this feels like now, and it doesn't feel so good. Let's reverse that and return to our natural state of oneness consciousness. So God Source has responded to this collective outcry for help by beaming constantly a lot of high vibrational love and light to Earth, which is elevating the frequency of everything and every person on the planet. Now, the light from Source has the effect, as I understand it, of bringing to the surface all of a lower vibration. So everybody's stuff is now coming up, and it's happening individually in each person's life, whether they know what's going on or not. It's happening collectively to the human race, and that's why you see crazier headlines than ever in the news. It appears on the surface that things are getting worse, and in fact, they actually are, but only short term while we release all these lower vibrational energies. Once those are released, then we can return to oneness consciousness. My understanding is we've already moved from the third dimension, or what really should be called third density, into fourth density, and we're on our way to fifth density, which is a vibration of unconditional love and oneness consciousness. And I'm hesitant to get in predictions, but channeled sources that I trust say that this process will be complete in approximately 9 more years. So that's where we're at.
Interesting. Couple of things, couple of questions that from what you just mentioned. First of all, I always say, Spirit, doesn't communicate on the I feel crappy channels because the vibration's too low. And so when somebody's lost a loved one and they're in deep fear, deep grief, which everything that feels bad is a form of fear, in my opinion. Every emotion is a form of fear. And so I say, ask your loved one to come greet you in your dreams, because our bodies reset. It's been my experience that our bodies, when we sleep and we get rest, it's like we reset back to the spirit frequency, kind of like the factory preset frequency. And so I'll tell people when they're in deep grief, ask your loved one to come join you in your dreams, because you're not awake and feeling the grief. You know, your brain's had a little bit of a break on that. And that's what you alluded to earlier. Secondly, when it comes to us being separate, and it's part of the human experience, certainly I have people tell me all the time, but we're more divided now than we've ever been in our lives here in America. And I'll say, well, have you ever heard of the Civil War? I mean, you know, that was like the North against the South. I live in Alabama, and at Thanksgiving, I'm asked to bring Yankee dressing for the turkey because, you know, down here, I'm still a Yankee, even though I've lived here 25 years, 30 years in the South. And so I think that it's all a perspective. People who don't watch a lot of news don't feel like they're divided at all. It's what we're fed. And I believe what we're fed is all part of the trajectory again of what our spirit wants to explore and experience. Do you have a thought on that?
Well, I agree with what you just said. And, you know, on the subject of the news, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, but I will say I do think the mainstream media news outlets are controlled by a very small number of people who do not have our best interests at heart. And that's why the news is fear-based. But you do see these positive news sources starting to pop up around the internet where they report only on loving, positive things. There's a lot more of that going on than the negative. It's just massively underreported, but you can seek it out now. And I would advise people to do that. In terms of mainstream media news, I very rarely ever look at it because I want to tend to the garden of my consciousness, you know, quite carefully and not let weeds grow there, so to speak. And I don't know how anybody could do that if they were on a diet of mainstream media news.
Right. I'm thinking of the old-fashioned soap opera. I don't know if it's still on the air. As the world turns, you know, the world's going to continue to turn whether you're watching the media or not. And the old adage for anybody that's in news is if it bleeds, it leads, because it's going to get a bigger emotional response that's going to trigger fear, that's going to have the person wanting to watch the news more because they want to be sure that they're safe. You know, there's some kind of bombing happening on the other side of the world. Well, oh my God, they can come bomb us. And a lot of that is irrational fear. But the bottom line, truly, and you know this from your corporate days, is the more eyeballs that are watching the news and the more clicks, the more ad dollars are generated by the media sources. They can charge more for the advertising, and it's all about generating revenue.
I completely agree.
Yeah. So that's interesting too. Okay. Let's go back to the Council of Elders and planning a life. Is it that you stand in a sphere like in Vegas and it's a 360-degree movie that's going around at the same time? Are you in a map room where there's a timeline that's being set up with little snippets of videos? What have you heard? I'm fascinated to hear what you've learned from all of these different people with whom you've talked in these past life or life between life sessions.
Well, you know, the field of between lives or life between lives regressions was founded by a hypnotist named Michael Newton back in the 1990s. And he's written several very good books, the best known of which are Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls. If you look at those two books, what he found, he didn't go very deeply into pre-birth planning. His is a much more broader exploration of life on the other side. But when he did touch on pre-birth planning, what he found was that souls were choosing their parents, their body type, their major challenges, where and when they would be born. And they're in I suppose you could call it a room, in which there's something equivalent to a TV screen on the wall, and they're shown scenes from the upcoming incarnation that are highly likely to happen. And not only do they see these scenes, but they can immerse themselves in it as though they're actually experiencing it, and they feel what they will feel when they have that experience. They can also feel what everybody else in the scene is feeling. So it's sort of a way of sampling the upcoming life, and then the guides ask, do you want to have this experience? And then you say yes or you say no.
So do you envision that there are multiple TV screens? Okay, here's version A that you can choose. Here's version B. Here's version C. You can keep it the way it is, or you can take parts of C and put it into A, or, come from A and C and put it into B.
That's more or less what Michael Newton found. He found that the older a soul is, the more free range they're given by the elders in terms of making choices for the upcoming lifetime. If they're a quote-unquote baby or infant soul, and they just don't have much experience incarnating on Earth, then there are fewer choices given to them and more choices made for them. But a typical thing that Newton talks about, for example, you might be given a choice of 3 body types, and one is overweight, one is average weight, one is underweight, and then you talk with your guides about what are the relative pros and cons of these different body types. Or you might be choosing a talent, and you're given a choice of having musical talent, or singing talent, or talent as a teacher, whatever it might be. And then you have a discussion about the pros and cons of these different talents and what you can learn and how you can be of service. So you just consider the different options that are presented to you.
That's so interesting that this Council of Elders is, in some instances, giving people the options, especially young souls, instead of that soul itself saying, well, I want to come back as a painter and be as good as Leonardo da Vinci. Whereas it's something that the Council of Elders is giving them more of an assignment kind of a thing. Am I understanding that correctly?
For younger souls, there are fewer options available, mainly because they may not yet have the wisdom to make the highest vibrational choices. The more experienced souls are given more free range in determining the details of the upcoming lifetime. I will also add here, in my work, especially when I do private client sessions and workshops, people often say, I had such a horrific experience going through whatever it might be. There's no way I would have chosen to go through that. Well, when you're on the other side planning your incarnation, you're not forced to go through anything. If you express doubt that what is being discussed is too much, the plan will be modified until it's acceptable to you. And if you continue to express doubt and say, I really just don't want to do this for whatever reason, then that's okay. Nobody is forced to do anything they don't want to do.
Yeah. And this Council of Elders, are they all entities that have lived human lives and lives in other, like in galaxies far, far away? I love that saying.
I believe that they have had human incarnations, or at least most of them have, and they understand what it's like to be here. They know how difficult it is, and they can empathize. But they are so far highly evolved beyond the third dimensional incarnational experience. They've gone on and had many, many physical lifetimes and non-physical experiences that are in dimensions of a much higher vibration where we can't even begin to understand what those experiences are like.
Yeah, you had mentioned that before. And that's one of those things where I say, well, I don't understand it, but is it feasible? Yeah. Will I understand it when I get back to heaven? Yeah, I believe that I will. Where does the soul begin? How does a soul even come into being? Have you heard anything about that?
I don't have any details, nor have I really tried to look into it. My focus is very pragmatic. I want to help people understand the challenges they're going through in their day-to-day lives. But in general, my understanding is that the soul is what you could call a spark of God or source. And then the personality is what we could call a spark of the soul. That's how I understand it.
Ooh, I like that. I hadn't heard that one before. That's a good one. What do you believe is the meaning of life?
It's to give and receive love as fully, as freely, as much as you can.
Okay. And so that's why we incarnate.
That's the bottom line reason. There are many variations on that theme, almost countless variations, but that's what it all distills down to.
Okay. All right. That's fair. Back to the virtues. What do you call them? The divine virtues exercises. Let's talk about that a little bit. Can you tell us more about those? You mentioned what they were. Please refresh our memory on what all those divine virtues are and explain to us what your exercise is and how you have found it to be helpful with your clients.
So the divine virtues are qualities that are important to the soul. And when people plan their biggest challenges, it's often because they think the challenge will give them the opportunity and the motivation to cultivate and express the virtue. Cultivation and expression are equally important to the soul. In other words, from your soul's perspective, it's not sufficient just to cultivate a virtue. What your soul then wants you to do is take the virtues you've cultivated and turn them outward, almost always in some form of service to others. That's the second half of the life plan. So in some of our online workshops, we do something called the Divine Virtues exercise. It's a very analytic exercise in which we track the growth in the virtues over the course of the incarnation, and particularly in response to major life challenges. So people fill out this matrix, and then they sum the rows, sum the columns, and it shows them their growth in the virtues over time in response to the major life challenges. And almost always, they'll find that there's been significant growth in 2 or 3 of the virtues. Again, the average person is working on 2 or 3. Some people know intuitively which virtues they're working on, but if you haven't thought of your life in those terms, if you just don't know which virtues you're working on, the exercise is tremendously helpful. That's really valuable information to have, because what you can do with it in the future, anytime a new challenge comes along, instead of feeling burdened or victimized or just not seeing any deeper meaning, you just say to yourself, okay, I know that I'm in this incarnation to deepen in whatever it might be, compassion, patience, and empathy. Knowing that, how do I work with this new challenge to cultivate and express compassion, patience, and empathy? So it has the effect of immediately assigning deeper meaning to an experience that otherwise might appear to be meaningless suffering. That in turn lessens the suffering, but it also allows you to cultivate and express the virtues in a much more conscious, much less arduous manner. So for those who are really focused on their spiritual growth and focused on service to others, for those who really want to make the most of the incarnation, it's very valuable information to have.
Can you give us an example, or does a client come to mind where they were going through something in their life and they worked with you and they did this divine virtues exercise, and then can you explain to us what the situation was that led them up to participate with you in this exercise and whatever else counseling you gave them, and then how it helped them in their lives and helped them really kind of discover and then go after what their purpose is?
Well, I'll just talk about myself, since I'm pretty well acquainted with my own life plan. So my pre-birth plan is one of these learning through opposites life plans. And I wanted to deepen in compassion and self-love. I chose to incarnate in a family in which my mother has significant mental health issues. She was extremely abusive, emotionally and occasionally physically. And the absence of compassion in the external environment was intended to drive me within, where I hoped I would cultivate self-compassion. And then the second half of the plan is to take the self-compassion and self-love that are cultivated and offer them to others in some form of service. And I would like to believe, and I do believe, that I've cultivated quite a bit of compassion, quite a bit of self-love through this learning through opposites life plan. Now, it was an extraordinarily difficult way to do it, and I am hopeful that I don't have to do it that way again. I feel very complete with that experience, but a lot of good did come out of it. And I'll tell you something really interesting. A couple of years ago, I had a between the worlds experience in which I would say about 75% of my consciousness went back to the other side, about 25% stayed in body. So I still knew who I am and where I was, but mostly I was home on the other side. And a lot of things happened when I was back there, one of which was my mother's soul appeared in front of me. And when that happened, there was nothing but just overwhelming love between the two of us. And we kept saying to each other, I love you, I love you, I love you. That's all there was, just a lot of love. That is not at all the kind of relationship I have with my mother in this lifetime. And due to the character she's playing in this lifetime, I don't think it will ever be like that while we're in body. But this showed me experientially that is really the nature of our relationship on the other side. So it was just confirmation.
Is she deceased or is she still alive?
She's still here. She's 88 years old, in reasonable health. I don't think she'll be transitioning anytime soon. Our relationship is friendly, cordial, polite, but it's not deep in any particular way. And it just can't be due to the limitations she chose to have in this lifetime.
Do you find that you have compassion for her and perhaps what she's been through in her lifetime, perhaps in her childhood or adult life, that you can not say, okay, the way you treated me was okay, because it wasn't, but come from a place of compassion where you can at least maybe say, okay, this is the way that she was raised, so of course that's how she treated me, kind of a thing. Have you gotten to that point, or is it feasible for you to get to that point?
No, I got to that point years ago, and she was abused as a child as well. And also, I have a lot of compassion and empathy for the fact that she's somebody who constitutionally, and by that I mean both genetically and emotionally, gets overwhelmed very easy. And as everybody who is a parent knows, the demands of parenting are such that you are going to get overwhelmed again and again and again. It's just the nature of being a parent. She's not constitutionally set up to be able to handle that. So the demands of raising me and my sister, I think it was just absolutely overwhelming to her. She did the best she could, but she's just not well equipped to do that. And I do feel a lot of compassion about that.
You're in touch with your sister now?
Oh, yes.
And what does she think about the work that you do?
Well, she's encouraging and positive, never says anything judgmental directly to me, but she's very much a mainstream personality in this lifetime. That's her plan. And so I think it strikes her as out there. But I'm okay with that. I mean, by mainstream standards, it is out there. So that's just the nature of what I'm doing.
Yep. My brother Jay, Rob, he'll love this. He, thought I was nuts, especially on the medical intuitive stuff. And I'm an inventor of surgical devices sold throughout the world and a former manufacturer of them, in addition to a bunch of other entrepreneurial ventures and other industries. And he'd be like, yeah, whatever. And then one day, he had a friend that was in trouble. He'd had a stroke. He was in the operating room, his friend Tim. They were removing part of his skull because his brain was swelling. They were trying to help him heal. And he called me on the phone and he said, okay, Tim's had a stroke. Do your thing. So I did. And I gave him information that he took back to the family that there's no way he could have known. One in particular was about a deal that his friend Tim, who's a lawyer in a big development company with his father, they were partners, and there was some big deal they were closing, and there was something that only his dad and he knew. And he wanted my brother Jay to get the information to his dad on this deal from the OR under anesthesia. And so it's been fun to watch that evolve. And now he calls me all the time, when something's going on. So sometimes it takes something really dramatic or shocking to kind of say, okay, well, maybe she really is doing something that, that is like what she says she's doing, kind of a thing. I love that. So do you find that with the different people with whom you've worked that you'll see a semblance of commonalities in them? Or have you looked at, obviously you're analytical because your background and you're talking about some of these different exercises. Are you finding that in different eras, perhaps maybe in the 2000s, people were exhibiting these divine virtues that they were working on, and now in the 2020s, it's a different set? Are you seeing commonalities in any of that?
I can't really say that I have seen changes in time over that. The time period of an incarnation is long to us when we're in the incarnation, but from the perspective of spirit, we're only here for this little blip in time. So I think those kinds of sea changes in what people are working on, I don't know that I would see that within the span of one lifetime. It's probably going to play out over a much longer time period.
Do you find that people that are drawn to you and your work have commonalities? Like it's somebody who's maybe lost a loved one recently, or somebody that has job dissatisfaction or something along those lines. Do you have commonalities that you're seeing in that?
The people who have been coming to me for the last couple of decades, they're generally in one of two groups, and there's overlap between the two groups. One is they've had something happen. There's been some kind of trauma, and they're trying to make sense of it, figure out how to respond to it, how to heal from it. They're looking for answers. And some of those people have never been on a spiritual path before. That's one of the purposes served by those kinds of things, is to open them up spiritually. The second group of people are just general spiritual explorers. They've been on a spiritual path for a long time. They feel like pre-birth planning is the next step for them. The other thing I see quite a bit, and it's interesting because, you noted that I'm analytic, and I am, but I seem to be drawing a lot of very heart-based people. Not to say that they aren't analytic or can't be analytic, some are, but they're not primarily operating on that level. They're operating on a much more heart-based level. And that is becoming more and more the case. And I think there is a bigger trend going on, which is, I think humanity as a whole is moving away from the age of the mind, the age of the intellect, and toward the age of the heart. I think that's part of the ascension, and that's the transition we're in right now.
Okay. A few more questions as we're winding down here. When somebody comes to one of your workshops, what can they experience? What can they expect to experience? What can they hope to experience? Tell us about that.
Well, there are several different workshops. There's the Between Lives Soul Regression, which is the one we do most often, but there's also an Ascension workshop, a Higher Self workshop, an Empath workshop, a Star Souls workshop, which is for people from far away places who feel like they don't fit in on planet Earth. I'll just talk primarily about the Between Lives Soul Regression because that's what most people are interested in. So again, it's a long induction, about 2 hours to go through it. Start with some preliminary steps to help you relax physically and then mentally. Then I guide everybody through past life. They experience 4 different scenes in the past life. The last scene is the death scene. You leave the body in the death scene and cross back over to the other side, which I realize might sound a little bit ominous, but there's actually nothing to it. It's very easy and gentle. When you get back to the other side, most likely you're greeted by a spirit guide, but it could be a loved one, an angel, a master. You talk with whoever greets you about why you were shown that particular past life, how it affected the plans for the current lifetime, and what else is important to know about it. And then your guide or whoever you're talking to takes you to your council of elders. Now, in the group workshops, when everybody gets in front of their respective council, I prompt them to ask a very long and very extensive series of questions that covers all the major areas of their life. So we will go through every major relationship, every major challenge, emotional things, physical things, work-related matters. all the major areas of somebody's life. If they want to, at any point, they can ignore whatever question I'm prompting them to ask their counsel and just go off and have their own conversation. And people do that. But for the most part, people stick with the questions I'm prompting the group to ask. They're safe doing that because the questions are quite comprehensive. By the time all of this is done, people have a very good idea of what they planned, why, how they're doing, and how they can do better. Many people will say that it's life-changing. They'll say the questions they've wondered about their entire lives, they now understand the answers to, that things suddenly make sense that never made sense before. It's a deeply expanding and a deeply healing experience.
And what's the bottom line to that? First of all, are you doing it in person or are you doing it online? Do you do both?
Well, I used to do it just in person, and then COVID came along and put an end to that. So I moved everything online, and it's still all online at this time.
Okay. So what's the bottom line here? This client goes through the workshop. How does it change their life? You say it's healing in a way. Do you find that your clients change jobs, change marriages, move, make other big life decisions? What are some of the outcomes when people go through those exercises?
They might make big life decisions, but the changes are primarily in perspective and in attitude. So they will have a very different way of looking, for example, at the people who challenge them the most. They'll now understand this person is playing a role that I myself asked them to play. This role, even though I find it to be extremely unpleasant and even antagonistic, is actually for my highest good. And the responsibility here is not on this other person to change and become who I want them to be. The responsibility is on me to learn the underlying lessons, to cultivate the virtues that my soul wants me to cultivate. So there's a taking of responsibility that is extremely empowering and produces spiritual growth in a way that isn't possible without taking responsibility.
Yeah, it's happening for me. That old adage, it's not happening to me, it's happening for me. I agree with that. Well, what a fascinating, charming fellow you are, sir. My goodness, what a treat to get to spend this time with you and pick your brain to help educate us on this life between lives whole concept. How can people learn more about you and your work?
Just go to yoursoulsplan.com. I would invite everybody to sign up for the newsletter when you first get there. If you click on events in the main menu, you can see all the upcoming workshops. If you click on sessions in the main menu, it will take you to the page that explains the Between Lives Soul Regression. And on that page, there's a 1-hour video from a private Between Lives Soul Regression, so you can see exactly what's going on there. If you click on resources and pull the menu down, you'll see something called Rise to the Path. That's our membership and mentorship community. We meet together once a month on third Tuesday evening. It's really a beautiful community of very loving, very open-hearted people who just support and nurture each other through whatever is going on in our lives. If you're looking for community, that's really a beautiful place to go.
Okay, terrific. And we'll have all that information in the show notes as well. All righty, everybody, that's it for today. Sending you lots of love from Sweet Home, Alabama. Mwah! And from Ohio, too. We'll see you next time. To enhance your spiritual journey, click on one of the videos below and remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your family and friends.